All right. Well, welcome to my year of living mindfully, the Q&A portion. We want to thank you for making that crossover. You've absorbed a lot of information today, and quite possibly you want to see the film again, and that's A-OK. You can view it as many times as you'd like between May 27th and June 3rd. So we'd like to just jump into this Q&A and introduce who we have here. First of all, the filmmaker, Shannon Harvey. She's an award-winning director of two different documentaries. They're internationally acclaimed. The first one, many of you in the Dallas area have possibly seen, and that's called The Connection, Mind Your Body. And her book, The Whole Health Life, is about finding good health after being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. So, as a journalist and filmmaker, Shannon spent many years working for leading news organizations such as ABC and Fairfax. She's the recipient of the National Press Club of Australia's Health Journalist of the Year and now produces a popular blog and balances her health along with raising two boys, just like myself, two boys. Now, Danette Mann is Dallas-based, and she is also part of this Q&A. She's a certified trainer of mindful self-compassion. She's been practicing for 16 years as a licensed professional counselor, registered play therapist, and she's certified in EMDR. And often you'll find in Danette's therapy sessions that she is accompanied by her therapy dog, a little Maltipoo, called Shaq. She and her husband live in Dallas, and they enjoy spending time with her adult daughter and son-in-law. So, and I'll also say a little bit about myself. I'm your moderator for this quick Q&A, and my name is Diane Pfeffer, and I'm with Documentary Events. And so what I do is I organize and execute documentaries. Most of the times they're in person, so this is a fascinating experience for me because we're bringing you this online for the entire week. So we're going to jump in here with just the timeliness of this subject matter. In fact, it's quite fascinating because when the film starts out, there's some great quotes in there just saying that we're experiencing an epidemic of mental health issues. And that is so true right now, and it's actually being exacerbated with this COVID-19 going on. I had actually saw an article last week in the Washington Post that said that nearly half of Americans are reporting that the coronavirus is harming their mental health. And this is according to a Kaiser Family Foundation poll. So that was just last week. And what's also just an alarming number is a federal emergency hotline for people in emotional distress registered a more than 1,000% increase in April compared with the same time last year. And then even though we're doing a lot of things online, the tele service or mental health service called Talkspace reported a 65% jump in clients since mid-February. So it's quite interesting because there's a statement in the opening of the film that says we are living in an epidemic of chronic stress. So again, what timeliness your subject matter had, because it sounds like we were already having an epidemic of chronic stress before COVID-19 came. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was astonished because I originally knew that I wanted to make a film about mental health, and I wanted to find what the one thing was, like the equivalent of eating my 5 fruits and vegetables daily, doing a 30-minute workout, or more or less or whatever it is, something that I could do every single day to protect and nurture and nourish my mind. And as a journalist who really values scientific evidence as a guide to navigate the very murky waters of wellness, I was astonished that there is very, very little research that addresses that particular issue. What was particularly astonishing to me when I was in the very early stages of the film was this special issue published by The Lancet, which is a very well respected medical journal, which came to the conclusion that every country in the world is facing and failing to tackle a host of mental health issues. Now, I was doing that research before the COVID-19 crisis. So,
Yeah.
what is the world going to look like now that we've experienced these worldwide shutdowns, unprecedented job losses? People like Danette and the work that you're doing, I imagine, is going to be more important than ever before.
Well, that's a good point, Danette. What are you seeing now, and what sort of factors do you think are contributing besides the stress of COVID-19? Was there a sort of a lead up to this that you were starting to see some changes in either our lifestyle or just sort of some factors in our society that are shifting?
Actually, I think I do notice, I was noticing things. I have been. I believe that the COVID-19 situation has increased this in our country and around the world. But the two things that I would particularly mention is I believe we are disconnected from ourselves. Um, in Texas at least, when you meet somebody, it's pretty expected that you would simply do a "how you doing" kind of thing when you walk by somebody, but you're not really expecting a real answer. You're expecting just "I'm fine" and moving on. But if I ask people and I mean it, I really want to know how they're doing, and they know that I mean it, they don't know. They don't know how they're doing. They don't know what they're feeling. And unless there's a pain, like they've sprained an ankle or something, they don't know how they feel. They don't know what their physical body feels like either. And that disconnection is not how we are meant to be living our lives. And it causes us to live in our head. And when we live in our head, um, unfortunately, the brain's primary responsibility is to keep us alive. So what it likes to do is search for problems constantly. It doesn't worry or think about or want to focus on things that are going well in our lives because those are not dangerous. So it really wants to focus on the things that we feel like might be a problem. So we spend our time ruminating and worrying and regretting and beating ourselves up and catastrophizing and those kinds of things. Um, and when we're doing that, when we're in our head, we're obviously not in a good place. We're not enjoying life. There's actually a term called asthenia, where just everyday normal experiences that should give you some joy aren't. And that is a part of depression. So I think of it as sort of like you have a really great friend that you trust and you know you can tell them anything. And even though you have arguments, you know you're going to get through it and it's going to be fine. And they move away, and neither of you work to keep the relationship alive. You don't contact each other. And over time, that relationship dies. And that relationship is the relationship with your body. That's the analogy. And all you're left with is this cranky neighbor who doesn't seem to like you very much, which is, our brains. So the second thing that I've seen fairly consistently and growing in my time as a therapist is somewhat related to that. And that is because we're disconnected from ourselves and from our experience, we're not taking care of things as they show up. So what happens with that is that you're getting some negative, hurtful experiences. You're getting, you're going through rough times. You're ignoring that, and that ends up causing it to go into long-term memory, and it builds, and you're not getting it taken care of. And one of the most common ways that ends up showing up is as depression. So that's one of the reasons I think depression is so high. So those are the two things that I feel like really stand out to me. And I don't believe that this COVID-19 is going to do anything but exacerbate that and make it even more, make us more aware that that's what's happening.
Hmm. Well, we know people are taking to Google and Googling certain words or phrases. It's interesting, before this, I had looked up and saw what is mindfulness is a popular question that's put out there. What is meditation? And what is mindful meditation? And so it was interesting, your piece with John Kabat-Zinn, because he really does a great job. And even though I had seen the connection, he has different knowledge that he's sharing in this film. And so I was just going to ask you, or just reflect on the fact that, he specifically said the goal with a mindful meditation is not to tune out, but to rather be mindful at how many judgments you'll have and how your mind will wander, but yet you'll bring it back. So I was just going to ask the both of you your experience with John Kabat-Zinn. I know, Danette, you had taken, is it MBSR training, and say a little bit, that's called, is it mindful based stress reduction? Is that what that stands for? Yeah. So you took from him a few years back, right?
In 2012.
Okay.
So quite a while ago.
Yeah.
I took his intensive 6-day course, and it was it's quite rigorous. I'm not a morning person, and we started at 6 in the morning, and we didn't finish until almost 9 o'clock at night. And the day was spent doing walking and sitting meditations and some discussions and eating, and otherwise it was all meditation. So it was rigorous, but it was also divine. Um, it's so calming, and he's so calming. His presence and his words. It's almost like he is very aware of every word that comes out of his mouth, and each thing that he says just is soothing, and he allows you to understand this whole mindfulness and meditation practice in such a deep way that you truly do have a clear understanding of the value of it. Um, and the thing that actually I noticed the most about the results for me of taking the class was that for at least a solid week after I left, my nervous system was so calm that literally nothing upset me. I could have almost anything happen to me, and I was able to handle it with um, a calm presence. So that really showed me the value of that. And in fact, it's because of that course that a couple of years later I took the Mindful Self-Compassion course, because it was such a meaningful, life-changing experience for me.
That's amazing, and I liked how you also had that same experience. I wondered if that viewers have when they see him on the screen. There is something so calming about him, and I thought I might have been the only one that noticed that. But I wondered, Shannon, this is your second time around interviewing him, and I just wanted your thoughts on just being around John Kabat-Zinn and the knowledge that you gained from him.
Sure, yeah. John Kabat-Zinn's work is so influential for so many people who begin a mindfulness journey, including me. I think when I first interviewed him, I think I hadn't quite understood how seminal his work was. And it wasn't really, though, until I intentionally did my year of living mindfully, where I set out to meditate every day for a year, and I actually did mindfulness-based stress reduction as part of that it really landed as to what he's contributed to the world. And it's a relatively demanding program, MBSR, because it asks you to commit to not only 45 minutes of training a day, but also to mindfulness in your everyday life, mindful eating, mindful conversations, mindful walking. And that, it was like a turbocharge for my practice doing MBSR. So that really was a big change for me. Yeah, it was actually, I think it was after I'd finished MBSR that it sort of became pretty clear to me that there were things that were happening in my life that probably scientists weren't going to be able to measure. Yeah. Um, just before you go on, Diane, I'm
Sure.
just gonna see if I can give this little guy to his father,
Sure, sure.
because
Yeah.
although his presence, I'm sure, is delightful. Um, I think it might be easier for me to focus and be with you guys. So if you'll just bear with me, I'll go and deliver this little guy.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
So you bring up a good point that it took you some time, to go, probably from a 5 minute meditation to 10 to 20 to then ultimately 45 minutes. So I so appreciate, and I guess I'm speaking for the audience, but I would think there's other people like me out there in an audience that is there. We are appreciative that you actually normalized the angst that people have in getting started, in staying with it, in making it part of your life, practicing it. So I thought that was something that not a lot of people cover. And I know, Danette, you have some views on that too about, so we're going to touch on, what what are some tips to being successful of practicing mindfulness. But I noticed, Shannon, that you practiced in a variety of places, in the bathroom, on a train. So, what sort of came up for you? Did you kind of walk away with the secret recipe for yourself, or talk about that?
Yeah, it definitely. I think mindfulness training probably needs a contemporary rethink in terms of how it's positioned to people, because I think the wellness industry, I think well-intentioned people have sort of presented mindfulness as this wonderful thing and conjures up images of glowing balls of light and sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and Willoughby Britton once said to me, like, it's kind of branded as though it's like a warm bath for your mind. And my experience of mindfulness, especially when I first started, is that it was anything but a warm bath for my mind. That turning inwards and really seeing and or hearing the contents of my own experience was actually quite difficult to do. And I guarantee you that in those early days, if not for the army of scientists that were tracking my every move, I would not have continued, because in a world where there are very good looking Highlanders to watch on streaming television, rescuing, very intelligent and wonderful heroines, it's quite difficult to find the motivation to sit with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. But that did change throughout the process as I started to feel and notice the experience of the training in my everyday life. And I liken it a lot to exercise. So it's like you might start a new exercise program and it's like pretty unpleasant and you might feel sore afterwards. But if you stick with it, if you find something that you enjoy and you stick with it, pretty soon you notice that, bringing the groceries in,
Right.
from the car is easier. Or for me, picking my 3-year-old son up he seems a bit lighter, and so, and that it's the same for my training, for my mindfulness training as well, that after a while it was like, no, this is really different. And I noticed that going up to that 45 minutes a day that John Kabat-Zinn has established in the 8-week MBSR program made a really big difference. And I know that 45 minutes sounds like a lot to commit to, but there's a reason for it. It was Amishi Jha who said to me, because I was trying to kind of get down to this dose question, like how long should you meditate for and what does the science say? And Amishi Jha said, look, we don't know, and it's probably going to be different for everybody. But the way I think about it is some is good, more is better, but don't overdo it. And I think by that she meant that if you're really struggling and you need help because, issues are coming up for you personally and you're noticing changes that are troubling, that's when you get help. Yeah.
Danette, what are your thoughts? Because you run mindful self-compassion workshops, right? And there's an element of mindful meditation in that. And you're asking people in groups and they're brand new to this. So what have you found? for the
I was
process?
going to say, I'm really glad that Shannon talked about the aspect of it that she did, because that is a very common and important part of what to expect and how to understand what the process will look like. And what I was going to mention was a little bit different part of that, which is the other thing is that people have one of two things. They either are really afraid, they get very distressed when their mind is calm. That's one of the reasons they stay so busy, is that there's things there that they don't really want to look at. And they really do need professional support, probably, just to get started. And the other thing about it is that people who are extremely wise and intelligent and can read information about all of this will still say, I can't do it. I just
Hmm.
don't, I can't do it. I can't still my mind. So I'm obviously not a good meditator. So I'm going to stop. And what's cool is when you can help people understand that there's no such thing as a good or a bad meditation, that there is just
Mm.
meditation. And some days it's going to feel good for you. And then other days you're going to walk away and say, gosh, I don't even feel better. I just feel awful. But that's okay. That's obviously part of what the meditation does, is awareness and acceptance of what is. So in the mindful self-compassion course, we do have some core meditations that we start each class with. And I find that from the beginning to the end, the ability to benefit and feel good increases as people continue to experience the meditations. I do get a lot of questions about, people want to be technical, like when's the best time? And like Shannon said, how
Right.
long should we meditate, and what kind should we do? And the whole point of self-compassion is that if it's a struggle, it's not self-compassionate. So the answer is always find out what works for you. What what works for you? If it's 5 minutes, if it's 2 minutes, if it's 25 minutes, don't beat yourself up that it's not 45 or that it's not 20. You're only doing 5. We know that any amount of meditation is going to be beneficial. So that freedom, I think, helps people stay with it too. So.
Well, and you bring up, Danette, this concept of inner critic, of someone saying, I'm not good at this. Why did I think I ever would be? I don't think I should do this. So talk a little bit about mindful self-compassion, since we've already brought up the term of what is mindfulness, what is meditation, what is a mindful meditation. So tell us how mindfulness works with self-compassion and what self-compassion is, because this is all it's mentioned in the film through the interview with Dr. Kristen Neff, who was the pioneer of self-compassion.
I might use a flower plant as a way to talk about how mindfulness and self-compassion are um, related to each other, how they work together. Mindfulness would be the plant. That's where you start. And it's there all the time because we want to try to live as much of our life as we can in a mindful, moment to moment awareness without judgment of what life is bringing us. And only when it's the right time does a bloom show up. So as in self-compassion, only when we experience suffering or pain, emotional pain or mental or even physical pain, it's only in those moments that we need self-compassion. So we practice mindfulness to know when we need to be self-compassionate. And so that's the core component, but there are two other components that are equally important. One is just the understanding, to be aware of, remind ourselves that every human being is going to struggle. They're going to have difficult experiences through anger, sadness, grief, frustration, irritation. And those are coming out of experiences of perhaps the loss of a relationship, difficulties at work, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, um, or some embarrassment or disappointment or failure. And when that happens to us, if we can remind ourselves that it happens to every human being just because we are human, and not because there's anything particularly wrong with us, then we don't have to hide and we don't have to feel less than. And that is an important component. It's called common humanity. And then the third component, fairly logically, is kindness. When you are experiencing suffering, emotional pain of some kind or mental pain, just to know that you want to ask yourself, what do you need? And then actively go about trying to give that to yourself the way you would to a friend. What would you do for a friend who was really in a situation where they needed support and understanding and encouragement and they were feeling really down? That's what you would do for yourself, whatever that might be. And if it's okay, I'd like to just add while we're talking about this that there are two kinds of compassion. And kindness, I'm sort of morphing into like the self-compassion. So kindness is an aspect of self-compassion, but if we're looking again at the different kinds of compassion, it's the same thing, but it's like two sides of a coin, two wings of a bird, you might say. And what we've termed it is the yin compassion and the yang compassion. And yin compassion is more or less what I've been talking about. It's being gentle with yourself, offering yourself soothing touch or kind words, or perhaps reaching out to a friend when you're in pain and needing some support. So it's a gentle and soft focus. On the other hand, there are times when we need to stand up for ourselves because we're being mistreated, or we want to stand up for somebody else who's being mistreated. And we call that the yang compassion. And that's much more like a mama bear protecting her cubs. It can be fierce. It can be very strong. So I just kind of want to put that out there because I think that it's something that not everybody's aware of in terms of what is self-compassion.
That's great. And it just brought to mind that if folks want to have more information about self-compassion, they can visit Kristen's website, right, Danette? The Center for Mindful Self-Compassion.
Well, the Center for MSC.org is a great resource for all kinds of information about classes, training, all over the world. Kristen has a website, selfcompassion.org, that also has a lot of the research, and she has a self-compassion scale that you can test your self-compassion in different areas for free, and then she gives you a way to score it. So both websites have some really positive and helpful resources that would be really beneficial for someone who's interested in learning more about it, finding out where they can go to get a class or to read more articles about certain aspects of it that they have an interest in, because Kristen's website actually has the research categorized by the topic, like self-compassion for autism, self-compassion for depression, self-compassion for nurses. I mean, it's very detailed. So
can I just add there that self-compassion scale, I took, it's really easy to do. It's really accessible on the website there. And I took it just before I interviewed Kristen for the film. And at that point I was about, I think I'd just completed MBSR, or it was around that same time. So I'd been meditating for some time, but I was sitting just below average on the self-compassion scale, which really brought to my awareness that self-compassion is something that we need to add to the practice, or that I needed to add to the practice. So I started doing some of the techniques that you guys teach, and I'm really happy to say that more recently I took the self-compassion scale and I've improved significantly. So actually doing this as an intentional practice does, well, for me, it certainly has been worthwhile and continues to be worthwhile. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. It sounds like you said, Danette, you have this exponential growth when you combine the mindfulness practice with self-compassion, for a person.
The research shows, yeah. And so Shannon is our one speaker for that, spokesperson.
Well, shifting gears here to, again, just trying to think of the population that's tuning in for this Q&A, and just shifting it to anxiety, because I also think that that's inherent right now in our society, around COVID-19, but also even before that, with college age children young adults that are attending college, and with teens, and we have certainly have parents online listening and viewing this. And so I really felt your interview with Dan Harris, of 10%.com, or the author of, I think his book is 10% Happier, was so timely as well, Shannon. I wanted you to kind of highlight what you learned from him about anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, Dan has a really lovely way of kind of making his journey really relatable, and
Hmm.
making it accessible to a wider audience, which is why I really wanted to include him in the film. Um, but I mean, he was interesting because he had the panic attack on national television, and in a roundabout journey came to mindfulness from there. But he also talks a lot about how his panic attack was really the manifestation of probably too much partying, too much drug taking, and self medicating for his depression that he was experiencing after his correspondence years. And so I think one of the issues here is that mental health really is a mixed bag, right? It's like, we might go and seek treatment for something like anxiety, but then we realize that we've got some underlying issues that have been unaddressed. So I think for me, I'm not a mental health professional, so I certainly would never offer any advice at that level. And I think Danette would probably be able to kind of come in on this with a lot more wisdom than I can. But I think what I would really emphasize is the importance of having good teachers and good therapists, and to not be afraid to reach out and ask for help when needed.
Very well said. Danette, what are you seeing now with this heightened awareness of anxiety, and as well as occurrence of anxiety at younger ages, correct?
Hmm. It is. It's starting and actually in elementary now. It's just amazing to me. Um, just to piggyback off of what Shannon was saying, I believe that in anxiety in most of us comes from, if we're not connected to ourselves, and we now know, I think it was by the year 2000, they were saying that they did a study and asked people, how many friends do you have that you could reach out to in an emergency, like if you really needed to talk to somebody? And the answer was zero. It used to be five, and it's now down to zero. And so I think that what therapists offer, or professionals of different types that offer help to people with anxiety, is they offer connection, relationship. And what's been really exciting for me is that when I first became a therapist, I thought that relationship was really important, but in our country it was more about evidence-based modalities, and so you were to use a particular type of therapy procedure for different things that were
Hmm.
popping up in the person that came to see you. And now they're back to saying it is the relationship that makes the most difference. And when you can connect to somebody and you feel safe and you can trust them and you can start to explore yourself in a safe environment with another person, that is extremely helpful for anxiety. So I'm just really happy that my field is re-embracing the whole, it's all about the relationship.
Right. It's so true. And we are living at probably with the most people ever living by themselves. I think I read that in a book called "This Land of Strangers" by Robert Hall. He's a Dallas-based author. Is that it's an unprecedented number of people that are living by themselves. So you have this already self-isolation going on. Well, take us to the whole idea, Shannon, of refugees, and the thought when you were making this film, like, let's add this component in it? And how did you, was that a long process and getting all the clearance that was needed and setting that up and choosing that location?
Yeah, so it became really clear about three-quarters of the way through my year of living mindfully that regardless of the scientific outcome, like regardless of what the neuroscientists found and the, cellular scientists found, that I would continue meditating. And that was because the effects on my life had been so palpable. But that was kind of an anticlimax for a film. So the other question that really, kind of re-emerged was the whole premise for the film, which was that I was looking for something that could be practiced by anyone with any level of education in any circumstances, and in any culture as well, in the same way that we can all eat healthy diets and we can all exercise regularly to maintain good health. I was looking for that thing that we could all practice to nurture and nourish and protect our minds. And so that really led me to start learning a lot more about the humanitarian crisis, where more people have been displaced than even after World War II. And to realize that, shockingly, although there are many aid organizations and not-for-profits and places, organizations like the UNHCR, who are doing really excellent work providing food and shelter and even education, and in some cases work opportunities for displaced people, there's practically nothing being done for the mental health of refugees. And these are people who have experienced extreme trauma and face ongoing uncertainty. So I thought, at the end of the day, my problems are pretty much hashtag first world problems. The things that were keeping me up at night. My family was not threatened, and I, pretty much could predict prior to a world of COVID-19, I could predict what would be happening day to day. So I ended up really heading off to the Middle East, and that's where I discovered that program that's being investigated by Professor Amit Bernstein from the University of Haifa. And he's empirically testing it. He's running randomized controlled trials. He's doing it in a really rigorous way, and the way he's developed the 9-week program is that he's borrowed from elements from MBSR and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and other trauma programs, and that's probably why the early data coming through is showing really promising results for them. So Jules, who's my husband and co-producer, and I are really committed to raising awareness about Amit's extraordinary program. The next step for that is for it to be trialed in other settings. So he's been trialing it in an urban setting with people who are asylum seekers, not refugees. So that's a particular cohort. What needs to happen now is that we see what happens in refugee camps or in other populations, such as people who might have been resettled in their new country, in their new host country. So we'll watch this space and hope that the excellent work there continues.
Okay, well, let's, I'd like to touch on a really simple point. I loved this example. It's the aspect of floss one tooth, and that just brings it just down to a very simple term. Just the aspect of, practicing and really kind of showing up, as we might say, is really the first step to take at getting better at anything, but certainly at mindfulness. And I forget who said that in your film, but I thought it really put it in perspective. And it's also opens the door for people to try it.
Yeah, that was Amishi Jha, who's a neuroscientist at the University of Miami. And she's a mum, and she has a busy career going. And I said to her, how do you find time to meditate? Because that was my biggest problem at the start. And she told me the floss one tooth concept, and it was so changing for me. It was really helpful. Just sit, just give it a crack, as we would say in Australia. And that I still take that attitude to my practice. So although I aim for 45 minutes a day, if all I do is sit for 5 minutes because it has been that crazy, well, that counts. And so now I'm on day 995 of my year of living mindfully, and I haven't missed a day.
Wow.
That's great. Well, I think as a filmmaker, you love those kind of gem responses, don't you? Because they're perfect, what I call sound bites, and you get a lot of those. I don't know how many hours you have of film footage, but you've got to kind of cull it down to responses from people that are guideposts, that really are strong, and it's an opening for people to follow it.
Absolutely. We had, I think it was 300 hours of material that we needed to kind of sift through in order to, find this story that ultimately ended up on the screen. And I know because a lot of people watching this are documentary fans, so there's a kind of a felt disappointment knowing that there's so much amazing material that's sitting on the cutting room floor. So for those people, I will say that we are really hoping shortly to bring My Year of Living Mindfully podcast, which will be a free resource for people. And so, for example, Kristen Neff, who works with Danette, who was briefly in the film and is doing all that extraordinary work with mindfulness, self-compassion, we will bring the complete Kristen Neff contribution to the film through that podcast. So people can perhaps subscribe to my blog, which is shannonharvey.com, if they would like to be alerted as to when the podcast is released.
Okay. And then, Danette, what is your website?
Simple as well, DanetteMann.com.
All right. So that's Danette spelt with 2 T's. So it'd be DenetteMann.com. Okay. All right. Now, anything else, kind of ending notes from either of you?
I would certainly like to thank Shannon for the 2 documentaries that I've seen. It's quite an offering to the public.
It is. And, I'll have to remind you or just kind of reacquaint you with the experience of showing The Connection, Mind Your Body in Dallas, which was a few years ago, but the consumers wanted more and more. So when it all ended up, running the film here a few times, we ended up with 12 different screenings. That's what ended up satisfying the population here, at least just in Dallas. It was 12 different screens.
Isn't that the most you've ever had?
Yes. I've showed several films, and these would be in-person films, on the big screen, where my job is to drive traffic, to be in the seats, and people have to take time out of their schedule and really make a concerted effort to show up. And they did it in droves. They just loved that film. So I have no doubt that My Year of Living Mindfully will meet that same level of interest. So Shannon, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing because I want Shannon to be the one that gets to finish. I want to also put a plug in for you, Diane, because you bring high quality documentaries that you feel will be beneficial to the community, and you work really hard to find those, and then you work very hard to get them available for people. And I think the city benefits from what you do so much, and
thank you.
Shannon's documentaries are just awesome, and so it's because of you that I even know about it.
Hear.
Well, thank you.
Hear, as we say. Thank you, Diane. Really, my mission is to spark meaningful conversations that hopefully inspire change in the world, and without people like you, my mission would fail. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I really am so grateful to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, you can see more about other documentaries we'll be bringing to the Dallas area, or actually online. I'll be screening a film in September that is also associated with mental health and particularly with veterans. So that'll be in the month of September, which is Suicide Prevention Month. And we'll be doing a similar online free premiere. So you can find me at dianemarketing.com, or you can go to documentaryevents.com, either one. And I believe we're going to have two logos on this. On the screen when we're complete, and then you'll be able to click on those two logos and go to the website, so they'll be hyperlinked. So with that, remember, it just takes a piece of floss to clean one tooth. And we encourage you to open up the window in your mind to mindful meditation, take a mindful self-compassion class through Danette. Check out your favorite app. I know mine is Smiling Mind, and it's actually for children, but it tends to still work really well for me, and it'll at least open up the possibility of a 5-minute mindful meditation for you, and it's a free app. So whether it's an app, whether it's definitely other films that you might find, and please check out Shannon's website, as she mentioned. The Connection is a very good film to watch after you watch this one or before. Thank you so much for visiting, and thank you, Shannon, for all you do. It's been a pleasure working with you, and you as well, Danette.
Thank you.